I'm attorney Phil Jusino, and this is Finding Common Ground here on Altice Channel 115. You can see this show every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Channel 115 for you Long Islanders. If you don't get Altice, if you're out of the area, or you just missed the show, go to my YouTube channel, which is Phil Jusino. It's Jusino. You can also see the show on Facebook. You can also see prior shows. We've been doing this for a number of years. You can see prior shows on Phil Jusino. I also want to let you know that I will be going back to radio, 103.9 FM LI News Radio. I did that show on that station about 4 to 5 years ago. In fact, I started in February of 15, and I ended my run around the time of the election. And prior thereto, I had predicted a Donald Trump victory, and I was correct. People thought I was nuts. They told me so in a nice way, and it turned out to be the proper call, let's say. All right? So that show is called Phil Jusino Drive at 5. You can see that every Monday at 5 p.m. If you missed a show, same principle, go to Phil Jusino YouTube channel. It'll also be on Facebook because it's a radio show, but my producer will be taping the show and then downloading it to YouTube or Facebook, so you'll be able to see it again. And I got a lot of great sponsors that I'll be mentioning when I do that show. Now, if you turn on LI News Radio 103.9 at about 5 o'clock, you might not hear me just yet. The show comes on at about 5:06. News, weather, sponsors. It's a commercial station, so obviously they have to run commercials, news, and weather. So wait till about 5:06 and you should hear my show with Back in the New York Groove. That's the start. So let's get to it. We have two topics for this show. The first one will be a very tragic shooting. One officer was killed, one was wounded in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that took place in June of this year, 2020. We have a video we're going to show you. It's a bit disturbing. We don't show the whole video. I think we come in about 7 minutes into it. I watched the video twice, and we're going to dissect it. The other topic will be very important, and especially with the election coming in a number of days, on November 3rd. Mail-in ballots as opposed to absentee ballots. Big differences. There are similarities, big differences. And I want to talk about that because that's been in the forefront. The Dems love it. The Republicans are a little leery about it. So we're going to talk about that after we finish the first portion of the show about the police shooting. Now, we all know that being a police officer has got to be one of the hardest jobs there is. Being a fireman also, rushing into a burning building. That's why we lost so many firemen and police officers on 9/11, 19 years ago, almost to the day. We just had the 19th anniversary. They're brave. They went into that building, know that they might not come out of the building. Firemen, police officers, first responders, not just firemen and police, but first responders. But being a cop is a very difficult job because you're pulling somebody over and you don't know what's in their head and what's in their heart. You know, as a police officer, you're going to follow the rules and go by the book, so to speak. But you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know the next step. In fact, I was talking to my son the other day, and we were talking about liking it to like a football player. I was a running back in high school, and I knew the move I was going to make. If I was going to go left, right, run him over. The linebacker or the lineman or the guy in the secondary didn't know that. So he had to anticipate or react to my move. Very similar with potentially deadly consequences in a police altercation where the officer comes up, he just wants to give the guy a ticket or maybe make an arrest if the guy is drunk driving or something like that. And that's what he wants to do. He wants to go home at the end of the day to his wife and kids. Or if it's a woman, to the husband and kids. Like that officer that was shot in Compton. She had a 6-year-old kid. Thank God she survived. Thank God the other officer survived. They were minding their own business. So the video we're going to show you in a little while happened in Tulsa in June. These two officers, one is a sergeant. They have body cameras, so we know what's going on. And there's also a dashboard cam. And another officer approached a car. And there's a little bit of colloquy before. So they're talking about one of the officers saying, I stopped him and this is what he did. You're not going to see that part. The two officers approach the vehicle. The sergeant goes to the passenger side. There's only one person, some young punk who's 33 years old. You see what I mean when you see him and hear him. He was in the driver's seat, and the other officer went to the driver's side. These officers were incredibly patient. In fact, I think only one of them used foul language at the very end, but they were gentlemen. They were doing their job. And in fact, that young punk kept saying, I want to see a supervisor. And the sergeant said, I'm the supervisor. I'm a sergeant. So listen to me, get out. At some point, the sergeant held a taser in his hand. He said, I'm going to have to tase you. Please get out of the car. Now, this wasn't an arrest for murder. This young man, 33, he looked like a punk. He had the hat backwards, and he just looked like a real punk. His attitude, he was crying little baby. I'd use another B word, but we're on TV. And he just kept saying, you know, I don't want to get out of the car. Just give me the ticket. Let me go. And the officer was saying, we got to tow the car because it didn't have the right tags on it. So it was going to be towed. If this jerk would have just kept his mouth shut, got out of the car, they would have ticketed him if he had an illegal substance in him, if he was drunk or something like that. Maybe they would have arrested him for driving under the influence. But that would have been it. Right? Those officers would have gone home at the end of the day, and that young man would have got his ticket, taken his medicine, and got the heck out of there. So what I want to do now is show the video, and then we'll discuss it. So if we can run that video, my producer?
Sure thing, Phil. Before we run the clip, I just wanted to mention, this is the beginning of the clip. This is about 6 to 7 minutes into the clip. So the officer was already ordering him out of the car well before this video started. What you're about to see is the tasing incident.
Right, and then when we're done, you let me know.
Yes.
Your own camera, but you're on both of our cameras.
Right,
David,
just write me my ticket.
David, step out of the car. I'm not going to tell you again. Get out of the car now.
This is a driving infraction, please, sir.
Get out of the car because I have to tow it. And I can't tow it with you in it.
You don't have to tow it.
Get out.
I do. I told you I'm towing it.
Bullshit. Why?
Get out of the car.
You don't have insurance.
I do have a license and I do have insurance.
David, step out of the car.
I do have it. Let me look for it then.
David, get out of the car and I will find it.
No, y'all.
He's about to deploy the taser.
This is my car, y'all.
Taser. I'm going to hit him. Are you ready?
Fair warning.
Fucking
Get out of the car.
fuck you, dude. Oh. What the fuck?
Get out of the car.
And then the other officer goes to subdue him while he's still fighting while being tased.
Is the audience hearing what they're saying?
Yes. So that video that they had just watched, that was the incident just before the actual scuffle.
And you're going to show the scuffle now.
Yes. So right now, that the clip that the audience is about to watch is just after. You'll literally see the officer walk from the passenger side to the front of the car, and that's where this whole thing happens.
And that was the sergeant.
Yes, the one you're watching, the body cam of the sergeant. So I'm going to play the clip now for the audience to see.
Back up. You want to get sprayed?
No.
Get out!
Okay.
Now!
I'm getting out.
Get out of the damn car! Now, or I will spray you!
Fucking ground.
On the ground!
On the ground, man. I don't want to go to jail.
Tries to get back into the car.
Get out of the car! Get out now! I will spray you again!
Okay.
Get on the ground!
Still resisting orders.
Get on the ground now!
On the ground. Please stop.
Now the officer is going to try and get him on the ground.
Please. Why?
Get out of the fucking car!
Why are you doing this?
Get out!
Why are you doing this? Please stop. Help! Help!
Get out of the car!
You're violating my rights.
Get out of the
Matt,
car!
please. Matt, please help.
It's going to get graphic.
That's my friend. Please help. Stop! You're violating my rights.
David,
Please stop.
get out of the car!
Stop.
Stay in the car!
Matt, help.
Left arm.
Help.
I got this arm.
Matt, help. Help. Help.
Get out of the car!
Another warning.
Not even in gear.
Help.
David, you want to get sprayed again? I'm going to spray you again. Get out of the car! Get out!
Help. Help. Help.
You got him? What the? What the?
another shot at the officer. So that's not good. So Phil, it's back to you. They just saw the video in its full entirety. They saw the shooting. They saw the tasing incident. They saw it all. So what do you think about that, Phil?
The officer was Arash Zakeshian, and Sergeant Johnson was killed. He was murdered that day. The other officer was injured. And David Ware is the name of the shooter. Again, a young punk who all he had to do was comply. And that seems to be a theme in all of these shootings, whether it be a white man, a black man, a green man. If you are pulled over by the police, or if the police come up to you, I would say 99.9999% of the time, if you submit, you are not going to have a problem. You're not going to be happy about it. I've been pulled over before, and I've never had a bad experience, but sometimes you're pulled over and you're not happy about it. Keep your mouth shut and do what the officer tells you to do. If he's going to give you a ticket, let him give you that ticket.
Phil, if you don't mind, can I just say something?
Sure.
What's ironic to me is that in the video over and over again, you can see him and hear him say, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail. And he's refusing the police officer's orders.
Right. Well, maybe there was a warrant for his arrest.
Well, that's something that I hope, comes to light and, whatnot. But it's ironic that if that's not the case, if there's no warrant out for his arrest, he was willing to kill 2 police officers to not go to jail that night.
Right.
But he's going to be behind bars the rest of his life.
Right. Now, here's a case where, how did he think he was going to get away with this? Now, obviously, he wasn't thinking.
Can I also share something?
Yes.
In the video, his friend pulled up in the car. In the video, during that whole altercation, he was calling his friend Matt. And his friend Matt pulled up at the scene. And you actually hear one of the officers say, stay in your car, be smart. And then after the shooting, you can hear the shooter running away and screaming, Matt, help me, Matt, help, after he shot the police officers. So that was, that was afterwards, but.
So the point is, just follow instructions. If you see videos, and again, it could be cases where we think it's a racial incident. It doesn't, just because it's a white cop and a black defendant, it wasn't the case here, but that doesn't make it racial, right? You could have a black cop and a white assailant. Doesn't make it racial. Even with the Floyd case, where it looks like, murder to me, that's not a guarantee that it was racial. That cop could just be a bad cop. Well, he knew. They worked together, apparently, in the Floyd case. I know I'm diverging a little bit from what we're looking at. But that's just an example of, here, they were all white. So it wasn't a racial situation, yet you have a dead cop. Just goes to show you how dangerous the job is. And a lot of these happen, unfortunately, traffic stops. So it's not like there's a bank robbery and the cop runs in and there's a hail of bullets. That's not the common way most of these police officers die. It is similar to what you just saw. Now, maybe there was a warrant for this guy's arrest. I don't know. You couldn't tell from the video. But even if there was, now this guy's looking at murdering a cop. Now, I don't know if they have the death penalty in Oklahoma, but even if they don't, and I hope this guy does 40, 50 years, spends the rest of his life in jail. What you see on the video, and if you watch the whole video, you will see that these officers were gentlemen. They were going by the book. They didn't try to rough him up. They didn't curse him out. They didn't insult the guy. If they did, big deal. But they didn't do that. Now, there were body cameras, so you could make the argument the officers knew that they were being videotaped. Fine. There's more transparency. That's why I'm for body cameras. Because everybody, even that assailant, they had his name. They were saying David, and he's on the video. If you're thinking about doing something, you generally don't want to do it when there's an audience or when you're on a tape, right? For the most part. That's why they wear a mask or something, but we knew who this guy was.
Quick bit of information on that. The police officers actually allowed him to record the incident.
Okay.
In the beginning of the video, they said, yes, you can film it, but you're on our body cameras as well. So they weren't trying to be sketchy in any way.
And I like the transparency because it keeps everybody, generally speaking, everybody honest. The police officer, bystanders, because a bystander wants to get involved and help his buddy out. He knows he's going to be on a video, and that ain't going to be a good thing because he'll be charged. Like a lot of these riots, how do you think they catch some of these people? They got a video of them. And then all of a sudden they put it out and somebody's going to say, yeah, I know that jerk, that's so-and-so. And then they make the arrest, and they might be wearing the same shirt when they make the arrest. I saw one of the videos, the person had a shirt on and had a certain emblem, and they knew that was the person, even if you couldn't see the face, because everyone's walking around with masks nowadays. But here the point is that if the guy would have done what he's supposed to do, it would have been a different outcome. All right. Now I want to get to another point. In fact, I spoke to a police officer last night, a friend of mine, who was going to come on the show, but something came up. And I said, no, I was a prosecutor, so I was to that end of law enforcement, but I didn't go through the academy. I wasn't a police officer. I didn't face these kinds of dangers. I was in a controlled courtroom. So I saw things from the, let's say, through the eyes of a police officer who would tell me what they had to face. In some of my cases, it was relevant. I had asked that officer, what do you do in a situation where you're trying to pull the guy out of the car? You could see that in the video. You're trying to pull him out of the car, and he's fighting with you. He doesn't want to go. Now, this didn't look like a big, strong guy, but let's say it's somebody that is as strong or stronger than the officer, even if it's not as strong. Remember, the officer has certain procedures that he or she has to follow. So he's supposed to subdue the guy, put him in cuffs, put him in the car, bring him in and book him. The bad guy is not following any protocol. He's not following. The rules for him is to get the hell out of there and kill the cop if I have to. Maybe that wasn't his goal, but when you start firing on a cop, we're going to assume you were willing to kill that officer to get out of there. And that's what this guy did. He killed one of the cops. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the officer that was trying to pull, I believe it was the officer, not the sergeant at that point, pull him out of the car. Once that guy started to fight with you, my thinking, and maybe that's, and I wanted the officer to talk about that, and he did a little bit on the phone with me last night, is you're in a death match. That's what that is. Think about it. You're not cuffing a 10-year-old kid, or maybe even a female that is not going to put up too much of a fight. This is a grown man who might be on something, who's certainly angry. At that point, if I'm the officer, and I don't want to play Monday morning quarterback, but I'm just telling you, looking at the video, at that point, that officer should be allowed to do whatever he has to do. If he has to pull out his gun and shoot him, the real gun, not the taser. If he has to punch him in the face, because that's what happened. It looks like this punk got the gun of the officer and turned it on them. Now,
I believe that is what's going around, what's being circulated.
That's what it appears to be. I don't, because his hands were empty prior to that. Where did he get the gun? Unless he had it under the dash or something. But let's assume, and a lot of times it happens, it's the officer's gun. That officer should have been allowed, and maybe he was trained that way, but I know that they're reluctant because you fire that gun, and next thing you know, they're going to protest your house, riot your house, your family's going to be in for it, you potentially could be arrested, lose your job, God knows what else can happen to you. But at that point, if I'm a police officer, any citizen, and someone's fighting with me, if I have to punch him in the face, and I do that, I'll destroy his face, but I will do what I have to do to survive, to go home at the end of the day. That's what we have to allow our police officers to do. So when they're fighting back, it's no longer, I'm trying to cuff him. The heck with that. Take out your Glock and you shoot him center mass if you have to. That's what I would advocate, and that's what they should be trained to do. What?
You know, it's a real shame, too. A lot of people are saying, oh, police need to use non-lethal tactics to try to...
Baloney. In certain situations,
well,
but there comes a time when you don't.
No, absolutely. My point is that in this video, the two primary tools that police are given, a taser and...
Didn't work.
It didn't work.
Right.
Even after being maced twice, he was still able to have enough eyesight to shoot the police officers accurately.
So once the officer... just like there was the case in the city where this big man was selling cigarettes and they put him in a chokehold. Okay. If you're wrestling with somebody that's twice the size of you and it appears to be a death match, not that the guy's trying to run away, you do what you have to do. I understand there are certain procedures, but if it's your life or his, I want the police officer to walk out of there alive. If the other guy dies, he dies. And I know that sounds harsh, but the other person brought it upon themselves. Just like if I'm walking down the street and a man, let's say, walks up to me and starts fighting with me, I'm going to do what I have to do to put him down. If I severely hurt him or kill him, because then it would be me. I didn't start it. If he comes up and starts, what am I supposed to do? Well, he might break my jaw, but he's probably not going to kill me, so I don't want to fight back. No. You do what you have to do. There was another video I saw, and if I gave you more time, Dan, you could have probably pulled it up. There was a man, I don't know what it was, the scene was, but he was in some kind of tent. It was maybe some kind of function or party maybe going on. It was a big black man. And a big white cop came in, and the black man was wielding a knife. Right? He had a
I'm
knife,
familiar with this
a
clip.
long knife, and people were giving the guy some distance. The cop tased him. The guy that got tased kept the knife in his hand. He fell back. It looked like he was going to be disarmed, or at least out of the fight. The officer went up to him to arrest him, to subdue him. The guy that got tased got up. Actually, he just stood up because he was leaning back on something, slashed the heck out of the cop, his back. Tasers don't always work. And we say, let's use a non-lethal. If a guy has a knife and I have a taser and I hit him with the taser and it doesn't work, like here, like the example I just gave, that officer's life is in jeopardy. So where do we draw the line? When do you say, well, if the guy has a gun and the bad guy has a gun and the cop has a taser, he should tase him? At that point, why do you have the cop with a gun? This is not England, like the Bobbies, they're unarmed. Maybe that's changed over the years, but they don't have weapons, let's say. The cop has a gun for a reason, to protect himself and the people around him. If the person is threatening him with lethal force, a gun, potentially a bat, a knife, something like that, the officer should be allowed to use lethal force. And I would suspect they are, but too often you see them with tasers against people with weapons. And the example I just gave, that officer was slashed, could have been killed. And also people around him could have been killed, because once that officer was slashed, let's say the officer's trying to get the heck out of there, that guy's free to kill other innocent people in that proximity. So the officer has to be able to distinguish between a non-lethal situation and a lethal situation. And often it can escalate very, very fast. I'll give you another example. Remember that case not that many months ago, in Georgia? It was outside of Atlanta. In fact, Ed, my co-host that day, talked about it. He had been to that Wendy's, and they burned the Wendy's down eventually. These two officers, again, just like the video you saw, being gentlemen, talking to the guy. They were standing outside the car, talking. They were all being gentlemen. Even the assailant was being a gentleman up until the point the officer said, "I'm going to cuff you." That officer then handled those officers very easily. He was apparently a much more powerful man.
The perpetrator handled those officers.
What did I say?
You said officer.
The perpetrator, I'm sorry. The perpetrator, I think I got this little thing in my ear. The perpetrator handled those officers easily, threw them down. One of them grabbed the taser. I'm sorry, the assailant grabbed the taser of one of the officers, and he ran. And you see the video of one of the officers chasing him down, and the assailant turns around, you see it on the video, points the taser at the officer, and I believe may have fired. Now you're chasing this guy. He turns around with something that looks like a gun. Even if you assume that it's the taser, he hits you with that taser, he could harm you, because in that jurisdiction, tasers are deemed deadly weapons. And that same prosecutor that prosecuted that cop, he lost the election recently, but he used the fact against the cop that a taser is a deadly weapon, and it can be. Sometimes it's like a gun is a deadly weapon. You shoot somebody and you nick their arm, you're not going to stop them. You hit him center mass, you're probably going to kill him with a Glock. Right? So in that case, the officer got arrested, and so did the other officer. They both got arrested, which is ridiculous. I think they'll beat the rap because I don't think they did anything wrong. But you wait, and if he hits you with a taser, maybe he comes back and shoots you. Like in the video we just saw, one of the cops was shot on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
So this guy didn't give a damn. Right.
After he screamed, you can clearly see the guy turned back and fired one more shot at the sergeant that actually died.
Right. And the tragedy was the officer was killed. In the other case, the assailant was shot and killed. The one who, at the Wendy's near Atlanta, was running down in the parking lot, right? Now, I think other people are suing. They said the bullet might have missed. That's unfortunate. Right? You don't want to see any innocent people get hurt. But there are cases where you have to bring the guy down. Because what if he was running with a fully loaded gun? Then he could shoot other people standing around. So the bottom line is it's not an easy job to be a police officer. You have to make decisions in a second. If you ever played sports and you're like a quarterback or something, you have to make split decisions, but it's not life-threatening. You might get your clock rung, but it's not life-threatening. If you're the quarterback, you might get sacked. These officers are just like a soldier. Similar, just like a soldier. Things are happening around you, and you're at a disadvantage because you are beholden to the rules of engagement, whether it be the rules of engagement of a soldier, whether it be the rules of engagement of a cop. You have to follow those rules. And if you don't, you get punished. So that's why some cops would be like, well, maybe I don't want to engage in that guy across the street who's spray painting a courthouse in Manhattan. I saw a video, I think I showed it on social media. Who were the cops? There they were. Because if they go over there and they arrest the guy and he fights with them and they're going to lose their job, they get arrested, their house is going to be protest at their house or riots at their house. So they're like, it ain't worth it. Especially for a nonviolent situation. But meanwhile, the guy spray paints the courthouse, walks right across the street, nothing, no consequence. There was another one, a guy spray painted something else, he ran away, but it didn't matter. They weren't going to do anything at that moment.
Phil, if you don't mind me asking, were those federal courthouses or are they?
No, I believe that was state.
State, okay.
Right. And then the distinction is, with the federal, the president is obligated to send troops. Let's say they were going to storm a federal building.
Yeah.
The president would have to provide a force to protect that federal building. Not so much with the state. But the takeaway here is it's a tough job, and then you hear about defunding. Even Biden said something to that extent where we're going to change, move assets around, or you hear the term reimagine policing. That should scare you. Right? I think it's in Minneapolis, Minnesota, one of the legislative bodies voted to defund, and now they're upset because crime went up. You know the expression, you know what, Sherlock? That's what I say here. You defund the police, you take money away from them, you put less cops on the street in certain communities, Baltimore, St. Louis, Chicago, New York, certain places. You need more cops. And if you ask the average person, I've seen interviews like this, the average person on the street, you go to Baltimore, Chicago, and you say, do you want more people or less cops or more cops? You know what they're going to say? More cops. Who's going to say less cops? The bad guys, right? They want less cops on the street.
I was actually going to say the real only winners in that are the bad guys.
Right.
You know, average people, I can't imagine they wouldn't want police. They're not the ones having, crazy altercations with them.
Now, most people don't want a police state, but you know what? When you see the numbers every day in Chicago, 2 people die in a day, or in a weekend, 23 people were shot, 4 killed, a toddler was shot, a mother was killed. Maybe you need a pretty darn big police presence. Maybe in my neighborhood you don't, but maybe in some of those neighborhoods you do. Because it could protect those people. And they need protecting because it's a shooting gallery. Even the city, some of those places now are turning really bad. There were armed robberies on the Upper East Side where my daughter used to live. A lot of rich people live up there. I'm talking really rich that have billions of dollars, and they give a lot of money to politicians. When the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side start going south, going bad, you know things are really bad. Because the politicians, just like, and I can't stand her, and I don't like de Blasio as well, but the mayor of Chicago, Lightfoot, didn't really come out and talk too much about when innocent people were being killed. You know, gangbanger kills a gangbanger, I don't care. But innocent people get shot, she didn't really say much. Looters hit the Miracle Mile where Oprah shops and where the rich people tend to gravitate. And she came out and she said, we're going to come for you. That tells you where her priorities are. It's not the innocent people that have no power in Chicago. It's the upper middle class, or middle class, upper middle class, wealthy people on the Miracle Mile in Chicago. Whoa, wait, now you're coming in my neighborhood. And that's bad. So we don't need to defund the police. We need to support the police. Weed out the bad ones, and there are some bad ones, there's no question. Every profession, attorneys, doctors, electricians, plumbers, you name it, every profession has their bad apples. And you weed them out. Just like the guy that kneeled on the neck of Floyd for 7, 8, 9 minutes, whatever it was. Even if that wasn't the ultimate cause of death, I don't care. What that guy did was wrong. So even if it didn't rise to the level of murder, it kind of looked like murder to me, but even if it didn't, that man shouldn't be a cop and he should be punished for what he did. The cops at Wendy's, no. Right? And these 2 cops that were killed, just like the ones that were shot in Compton. Tragic. Thank God they survived. Are they going to continue? And it was 14 months on the job. Do you think they're going to, the woman has a 6-year-old kid at home, do you think she wants to stay on as an officer, as a sheriff's deputy? I suspect she won't. I can't answer for either one of them, but you have a kid at home and 14 months into the job, you're hardly out of your rookie season, and you're shot in the face. You're just sitting there in a patrol car. And the rhetoric, and I don't like to say it's Biden's fault or it's Trump's fault. The person who killed those 2 particular officers in Tulsa, it's his fault. But the rhetoric from BLM, a terrorist organization, and I say that because in Compton, when those 2 officers were shot, BLM and their ilk went to the hospital. They had signs already made. I don't know where that came from. And they were saying they hope they die, calling them pigs, blocking the emergency entrance. Now, those cops didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't even like in the murder of Floyd where you might go after that cop verbally in some way. That's different. Okay, that cop deserved it. These other 2 cops didn't. They were just doing their job. And they got shot in the face.
You know what's ironic? They're being judged by the color of their skin or
That's right.
not the
See, that's
content of
another
their character.
Right. In fact, one of my Facebook friends, who was a news guy, Richard Rose, made a comment when an attorney that I know, a liberal attorney, made a comment that, Phil, you're lumping all those protesters with BLM. And I'm not. But BLM is part of that. They're not going to try to dissuade that crowd or come out and say that's wrong. Like if I saw a white mob doing something, I'd say that's wrong. I don't care what color they are. But Richard Rose was right on point when he said to that attorney that I know, I won't give the name, he said, well, that's what you're accusing Phil of doing that, lumping, let's say, those black protesters with BLM, but they do it all the time, the other side, not all those liberals. They do it all the time. You're white, you're a white man, you're a bad guy. Or you have white privilege. How do they know what I had growing up? And I always say, I don't believe in white privilege. I really don't. I believe in socioeconomic privilege. If you're a white kid and you grew up in, Brentwood outside of LA, or you grow up in a hoity-toity community, or just even upper middle class, yeah, you got some privilege. You still got to go out and get a job and all of that, right? And if you're a black person born into one of those communities, you probably have a level of privilege that a poor white person growing up in a very, very poor area is not going to have. Let's be honest. Obama's kids, what do they have? They have privilege. Do they have white privilege? No, but they have privilege because who? Their dad was president of the United States. Or if your mother's, let's say, a black movie star, right? Or LeBron James. Let's look at LeBron James' children. Do they have white privilege? No. Do they have privilege? Yes, they do. Absolutely they do. And if you're a white kid born into a poor neighborhood, you're not going to have privilege, right? So the way you dress helps. Obviously, if you're well-dressed, whether you're white, black, green, or yellow, you're going to be treated better. If the car you drive doesn't look like, and it doesn't have to necessarily be, that you can't afford a Mercedes. I'm not talking about that. But if you have certain rims on your car, or you have a Biden bumper sticker, I'm only kidding about that, but you have a certain look to it. Just like if you wear your hat on the side and you look like a fool, people would treat you like a fool. So I want to leave this topic, that video, you can see the video. In fact, you can go to my website, you can go to Phil Jusino Facebook page. I have that there. It's probably about, by now, 10 posts down, but you can see the whole video. You can probably Google it, just say police shooting in Tulsa. Now, in the last 18 or so minutes, I want to talk about a very important topic because we have a presidential election that is the most important election in our lifetime. Absolutely. And maybe in the history of this country, maybe outside of Lincoln against Breckinridge in 1860, which ultimately led to the slaves being freed with the 13th Amendment. Not one Democrat vote. I always stress that. Let's be honest. And people can say what they want to say. I'm being accurate. Not one Democrat voted for the 13th Amendment. And we had a civil war. The president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln at that time, and maybe another president wouldn't have won that war. He made certain decisions that helped win the war, that put the country in a position to bring about the 13th Amendment. But now we have an election that is as important, if not more important than that. Why do I say that? We always have 1980 was an important election, Reagan, and the second time against Mondale, and Carter, the first one. Those were important elections. But this is even more important. If you see what's going on in the world, you can blame whoever you want to blame. There's a lot of things happening. And you have a president that wants to keep things, in a conservative sense, to the right. You have Joe Biden, who's been pulled to the left for a number of years, certainly more recently by the likes of AOC and Bernie Sanders. So this election is very, very important. And how the election is handled is extremely important. And in years past, with the exception of like Bush Gore, we had the hanging chads and the pregnant chad and all of that. And that took a while in the fight in Florida. This is now a battle between mail-in ballots, no mail-in ballots, how are we going to vote? So I wanted to talk about something because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the mail-in ballot compared to the absentee ballot. And I've heard them used interchangeably, and it's not. They're not the same thing. An absentee ballot, and I voted once by absentee because I was playing baseball in Florida and I wasn't going to be here for the election. You have to request the absentee ballot. There are certain rules in place. It has to be requested by a certain date. It has to be in by a certain date. You sign it in a certain way. You seal it. You send it in. That's an absentee ballot. All states have absentee ballots. Military, we've had absentee ballots since the Civil War. The other thing, and one last thing, with an absentee ballot, not everybody, for the most part, can vote by absentee ballot. You have to show certain things, all right? Being out of the country, being a student living outside of the country, having an illness or a disability. So let's just say you're a senior and you live in a facility or your house and you can't get out. You could qualify. Working or being on jury duty during voting hours. Serving as an election worker or poll watcher. Having religious beliefs or practices that prevent you from going to a voting center. I don't know what they would be, but that's on that list. And being imprisoned but still able to vote. You can do it by absentee ballot. Mail-in ballots is something very different. And until this month, or last month, August, New York didn't have those mail-in ballots. They had absentee ballots. So the mail-in ballot is, in some states, there were 5, and now there are more, they would just send it out to everybody. If you're a registered voter, you would get one. Now, I know President Trump and a lot of the Republicans are against mail-in, and I have problems with it. I'll tell you what they are. The Democrats want it. It's easy for fraud to happen with mail-in ballots. And even in New York, in the short time we've had that for the primary, there were problems. They weren't coming in time. I suspect there was a lot more fraud than people are aware of. Think about it. If I request an absentee ballot, I'm expecting it to come to me. I get it. I vote. I send it in. A mail-in ballot they're going to send in, let's say, 4 or 5 million or whatever the number is going to be in a particular area. How do they know if a person moved or died? Right? Think about it. I'll give you an example. My father-in-law, who's 90 years old and lives in Miami, visited me from time to time, my family, and would stay with us. Didn't live with me, would be there for maybe a number of months at a time, but didn't live there, didn't have an ownership interest in the house, wasn't a resident of my residence. Yet, a couple of months ago, there was an election in Three Village School District, which is a Setauket area, and I got an absentee ballot, or I'm sorry, a mail-in ballot for him. Why? He doesn't live there. He votes in Miami. But yet, I got the ballot. I got that for my wife. I got that, I think that was it, the three of us. And I was surprised. And I said, why did I didn't make any inquiries, I just left it alone. And I didn't use it. But what if it was a presidential election, let's say, or even a local? And sometimes a local election votes are magnified, because what if it's only 300 people voting in a particular election? Every vote is magnified compared to 100 million people voting or something like that. Big difference. I could have wrote down or signed his name. The safeguards are not in place. They're just going to get it. Okay, he voted. Where the absentee ballot, it's a little more secure. And it should be. So there's a perfect example. I also get mail. I'm sure anybody watching this show, I am sure from time to time you get mail. That's not yours. It could be your neighbors. It could be people that used to live there. It could be a number transposed. Now, what if it's a ballot? You vote, hey, I'm not going to give it to that person. I'll just write down Donald Trump, or I'll just write down Joe Biden, or whoever, and I'll send it in. That's fraud. That's against the law. But who's going to know? Like the person who didn't get the ballot might be, oh, yes, I didn't get the ballot. Or maybe he's going to vote in person, so he didn't need that ballot. Now there's 2 ballots out there. Also, I think it's the end of October. I think the 27th is when you have to get the mail-in ballot requested by. You're not going to get that in all likelihood in time. This thing could go on for weeks after the election. Right? Now, there are a lot of problems with the way New York has done it. In fact, there was an article in the New York Times, a very recent article, August of 2020, August 20th. And there was a bill that was signed in August by Governor Cuomo here in New York that allowed for mail-in ballots. And just listen to this number. Nearly 40% of voters cast ballots in the state's June 23rd primary. That's where you're voting for the Republican and then you're voting for the Democrat, not the general election. When an executive order authorized wider use by mail, compared with, and that was an executive order at the time, compared with as few as 4% in previous elections. So 4% to 40%. And New York is not an expert. There were only 5 states recently that did this, and they were better at it because they were more used to it. And it still could have been fraud, but they were used to it. Now, to open this up in a presidential election might not be the way to go. It says elections officials are anticipating more than 5 million absentee ballots in the November 3rd presidential, or 4 times the total mail-in ballots received by the June primary. This is in New York now. And it said the wasn't known for weeks, the outcome. You can't have that. And in the primary, you need to know who won, because that person has to start campaigning for the general election. And Peter Kaczynski, co-chairman of the New York State Board of Elections, the Board of Elections, said, I don't think it's realistic to think you can have a quick count this November. It's not going to happen. And the deadline to apply is October 27th. The election's the 3rd of November. That's only a week away. And what a mess that's going to be. Remember Bush Gore? Different issue, but it had to do with the election, and it held things up for a while. We didn't know who the next president was going to be for a while. And they got pretty dicey, and this all happened in Florida. Right? And then in June, that was the primary, Elections Board received a record-setting number of requests for absentee ballots, which led to huge backlogs that resulted in thousands of voters not receiving the ballots in time, and some didn't receive it at all. It's a recipe for disaster. Now, someone might say, wait a minute, you're telling me that what about a person who's infirmed? We already talked about that. If you're saying that now, you weren't paying attention. Absentee ballots, you can request them. Not hard to do. I did it before I went to Florida to play baseball. I requested the absentee ballot, and I got it. If you don't do it in time, that's your own fault. It's like a person that doesn't go out and vote. I was busy. Well, in New York, it's 6 in the morning till 9 p.m. If you can't find the time to do that, get an absentee ballot if you have a legitimate reason. It can't be just for any reason. Or if you want to use mail-in ballots, well, you don't have to have one of those conditions. Remember I said, you're out of the state, you're in prison, you're infirmed, but then you have to request the mail-in ballot. There's also a thing called vote harvesting. You know what that is? Let's say there's a nursing home and some unscrupulous person is collecting these ballots. And let's say there's 100. And especially in local elections, it can make a big difference. Even in a presidential election, depending on the state. If it's a swing state, it could make a difference. In California, probably not too much. Maybe not in New York. But in a swing state like Wisconsin or maybe Florida, I'm hoping Trump wins big in Florida this time. But a couple of votes. Trump beat Clinton by a small amount of votes in a number of states that could have made the difference in the election. So you have to request it, so the harvesting. So let's say I'm in the nursing home and I collect 100. And I know that Mr. Jones, Mr. Smith, and Mr. whoever are Trump supporters. I can tell. They wear the Trump hat around and they have the whatever. I got them, Jones, Smith, and Harris. Bad example, but I got those 3. Maybe they don't make their way to the mail. Don't tell me it can't happen. You ever see a video of a mailman or mailwoman throwing mail out because they want to deliver it? I think Newman and Seinfeld did that once, but it happens.
There's actually some examples on the screen right now.
Right. And it happens. They pull up to a dumpster, that's it. So you could do that, where you know those 3 guys in the example I gave were Trump supporters, and it can happen the other way. I suspect, I just think there's probably more cheating on the Democrat side because they're really pushing hard. I'll give you another example. As a Republican, conservative Republican, I think there should be voter ID. You can't get on a plane without ID. You want to buy alcohol if you look like a certain age, you're going to have ID. There are certain things you have to do, buy a weapon ID. But vote, and that's very important, very powerful. Why not? Who doesn't have ID? Illegals, but they're not supposed to vote anyway, except in some local elections. We have these liberal enclaves like in Virginia where they can vote, but a presidential election, they can't. So I was always surprised where I go to vote, and it's not like a big area. I walk in, often I'm the only one there standing on line, or maybe there's 1 or 2 people. I've never had one of those big lines you see like in the city. Never saw that in my area. And when I walk up there, well, you sign something. They don't check. I think they're going to say, oh, wait a minute, you usually make a loopy or a P. No. They didn't have any ID. I could have had somebody else could have walked in and said they were Phil Jusino. Could happen, right? And especially in an area where there's so many people coming in, it's a lot easier then, because they don't have the time. The people sitting there, you got these often elderly people sitting in a chair, and they say, when they turn the book around or whatever, they say, here, sign here, boom. They're not checking. Nobody's checking your signature. Why don't they check ID? I don't care if you're black, Hispanic, whatever. You have ID. You should have ID. I saw one time an interview. It was a Fox News program, and the interviewer went to, I don't know if it was Baltimore, Chicago, a predominantly black neighborhood. And he said to these people, because somebody had said the reason we don't do mail-in ballots, the reason why we don't do no ID, we don't request ID, is because some people in the minority communities don't know where the DMV is, or they don't have access to an ID. Hogwash. So they interviewed these people, and black individuals, and they were shocked. They were like, what are you talking about? I got an ID. I know where the DMV is, down the block. You make a left, and then they were like, why are you asking us these questions? One of the women said. And he said, because people, the Democrats, are saying, almost like treating the blacks like children. They don't have an ID, or they can't get an ID. No, they have IDs. Come on. That's prejudicial. If you're thinking that blacks and Hispanics can't get access to an ID, you're the racist then, or you're the prejudiced person, if you believe that. Okay? If you can't get an ID, then maybe, if you can't figure out how to get an ID, then you shouldn't be voting. Let's be honest. But they do, and they can produce it. Yeah, that's me. Okay, go vote. You forgot your wallet? Go home and get your wallet. You're not voting today. Right? So that's why it's ripe for fraud. And we've already seen it in primaries. And a primary is not as big as a general election. It's like half the election because it's for the Democrats or the Republicans. So very, very important that if they're going to do mail-in, which exists now, that it be done very carefully. And I don't want a situation where on November 3rd, President Trump has the election at hand, and then you say, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of mail-in ballots that are coming in. It's got to be a deadline. We have to end this on a certain date. And if you got your mail-in ballot and you forgot to put it in or whatever, you forfeited your ability to vote. We don't have to bend over backwards. I'm going to be voting in person on November 3rd. I usually do it 2 or 3 times. Only kidding. I find the time. It's 6 to 9. I don't care how many hours you work. You get up early before work, you go vote. Most of us don't work from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And if you do, guess what? Request a mail-in or vote again by absentee ballot. You could say, I'm not available at that time. And you might qualify. But you could find a way. So mail-in ballots, I'm not a fan. Right? It can be done properly. We've had too many problems. That New York Times article, go to it. You can Google it. August 20, 2020, it says New York will allow voters to cast mail-in ballots. But a lot of problems. And another thing, let me read this. It says, to diminish the reliance on the post office, some lawmakers have proposed scattering secure drop boxes across the state. Oh, that's a good idea. And people can drop their ballots in and have election officials collect them. All right, where do we have the manpower to do that? And let's assume you did. I don't think it's a good idea. Because you could have a situation where an unscrupulous person, let's say working for a particular party, knows that, all right, that mail drop is dead in a red area or dead in a blue area, and that particular person doesn't want to see those ballots see the light of day. Oops, that disappeared, right? And it can happen. And what I'm saying can very well happen across the country, which can affect it. We're just about out of time. I wrote a book called Divorce, A Practical Guide. It's a great read. I call it soup to nuts, about 90, 100 pages. Read it. It talks about what to do when you're going through a divorce, family court action, even some criminal law is mentioned in there. It's a great, great read. It'll help you out. If you know somebody that's going through it, get the book. Again, starting the 21st, Monday the 21st. So you're seeing the show on Saturday, Monday the 21st at about 5:06 p.m. Tune in to 103.9 FM LI News Radio, and you'll see the show Phil Jusino, Drive at 5. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day.